After my divorce, my ex-husband and his expensive lawyers made sure I lost everything. Nobody wants a homeless woman. While digging through trash, a woman approached me. "Excuse me, are you Quinn Morgan?" When I nodded, she smiled. "Your great-uncle in New York just died. He left you his mansion, his Ferrari, and his $47 million estate, but there's one condition." What she said next changed everything. "My name is Quinn Morgan, and I'm 32 years old. For the last 93 days, my home has been a 2011 hatchback. My current parking spot, carefully chosen for its anonymity, is behind a foreclosed strip mall in Redmond, Washington. The for lease sign, faded and peeling, is my only neighbor. It sags on its posts, a silent testament to failure, and I feel a strange kinship with it. Dinner tonight was a half-eaten turkey sandwich I found in a sealed bag in the dumpster behind a deli. I tell myself it builds character, that this is a gritty reboot of my life story. It's a lie I've gotten good at telling myself, a thin blanket against the cold truth. I press my cheek against the passenger side window, the glass cold enough to make my teeth ache. The condensation that fogs up with my breath smells of old coffee and a deep, lingering despair that has settled into the upholstery. This is the life Derek Shaw, my ex-husband, left me with. He kept the sprawling craftsman house we'd renovated together, the joint savings account, the entire life we'd spent a decade building. His team of expensive lawyers, men with shark-like smiles and $1,000 suits, used an ironclad prenup I signed when I was 22, dizzy with love and trust, to strip me of everything. I was left with a single suitcase of clothes that no longer felt like mine, and a portfolio of architecture school drawings that feel like they belong to a different person, a girl full of impossible dreams. My reflection in the rearview mirror is a stranger, hollowed-out eyes, sunken cheeks, hair I haven't properly washed in a week. Derek once said I was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. Now nobody sees me at all. A sharp knock on my driver's side window makes me jump so hard I hit my head on the roof. My heart hammers against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Adrenaline floods my system. A woman stands there, silhouetted by the flickering, sickly yellow parking lot light. She's poised, elegant, wearing a tailored wool coat that probably costs more than my car. She doesn't look like a threat, not a cop or a security guard, but out here, everyone is a threat until proven otherwise. I scoot over, my hand hovering over the ignition key. I crack the window just an inch, a sliver of cold night air cutting into the stale warmth of the car. "I'm leaving," I say, my voice raspy and thin, the voice of someone who doesn't talk much. "Are you Quinn Morgan?" she asks. Her voice is calm, professional, completely out of place in this landscape of urban decay. It doesn't belong here. I don't answer right away. Years of my mom telling me not to talk to strangers feels like a useless luxury instinct now. "Strangers are all I have. My name is Lydia Grant," she says, holding up a sleek business card to the narrow opening in the window. "I'm an attorney. I've been looking for you for 2 months. The name of her firm is embossed in gold lettering. Then she says a name I haven't heard in years, a name that feels like a ghost on my tongue: Edwin Bramwell, my great-uncle. The quiet, brilliant man my dad always called the dreamer who got away. I get out of the car, pulling my worn jacket tighter around myself as Lydia Grant, the attorney, explains that my great-uncle Edwin has passed away. The words hang in the cold air between us, feeling unreal. She tells me he left me everything. His entire estate, she says, is valued at $47 million. The numbers don't compute. It's like she's speaking a language I don't understand. I'm standing here trying to figure out where I'll find breakfast tomorrow, and she's talking about millions. She lists the assets as if reading a grocery list. A brownstone in the West Village of New York City, a vintage Ferrari, and Bramwell Architects, his legendary, world-renowned architecture firm. Then comes the catch. There's always a catch. To inherit any of it, I have to step in as the chief executive officer of the firm within 30 days. And I have to stay in that role successfully for 1 full year. If I refuse, or if I'm removed, or if I quit before the year is up, the entire $47 million fortune transfers to a professional architecture association. She hands me a thick folder, and inside is a first-class plane ticket to New York for tomorrow morning. Beneath it is a plain white envelope. I open it. Inside is $10,000 in crisp $100 bills. For incidentals, she says, as if it's nothing. I stare at the money, a sum that could change my entire world, then back at her calm, unreadable face. Failure is my native tongue, I'm fluent in it. But the thought of wasting this one impossible chance, that's more terrifying than falling flat on my face in front of the entire world. The flight to New York feels like a fever dream. The first-class seat is bigger than the back of my car where I've been sleeping. I spend an hour in the airport lounge shower, scrubbing away 3 months of grime and shame until my skin is raw and red. I buy a new set of clothes at an airport shop, a simple black dress, a soft cashmere sweater, comfortable flats. The fabric, clean and smooth against my skin, feels like putting on a costume, like I'm playing the part of a woman who belongs in first class. New York is a vertical roar, a symphony of noise and light and ambition that makes me feel impossibly small. The taxi ride from the airport is a blur of chrome, glass, and a million hurried lives. I keep thinking of my great uncle Edwin. I only met him a handful of times when I was a child during holidays. He always smelled of graphite pencils and old books. I remember him looking at a tower of blocks I'd made and telling me, "Build things that last longer than you do." The taxi pulls up to a West Village brownstone. It's more beautiful than I could have imagined, with dark red brick, ivy climbing the walls like a green lace, and a heavy, carved oak door. It's a fortress of quiet dignity amidst the city's chaos. I step out onto the sidewalk, my new shoes feeling flimsy on the solid pavement, holding the heavy brass key Lydia gave me. For the first time in 94 days, I'm about to walk into a home that is mine. The heavy door opens before I can even fit the key in the lock. A woman with kind, crinkled eyes and a neat bun of silver hair greets me. "You must be Quinn," she says, her voice warm and steady. "I'm Ruth Parker. I was Edwin's housekeeper." She doesn't say she works for me now. She says it like she's a permanent part of the house itself, a gentle, watchful guardian. The inside is even more breathtaking. It's filled with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, intricate architectural models on every flat surface, and the quiet, comforting hum of history. It feels less like a house and more like a museum of a life well lived, a life dedicated to creating beautiful things. Ruth leads me up a winding staircase. "Edwin prepared the 5th floor for you," she says, her hand trailing along the polished banister. "He had it done about 7 years ago." The 5th floor isn't a bedroom. It's a stunning, light-drenched studio. 2 massive drafting tables stand in the center, empty shelves line the walls, and a series of huge windows offer a view of the city skyline that literally steals my breath. Pinned to a large corkboard on the wall is a sketch, faded and tacked at the corners. It's a design for a community library with a green roof, something I drew in my final year of college. I'd sent a copy to Edwin, proud of my work. Beside it, a short note is pinned, written in his elegant, slanted handwriting: "Build boldly, refuse to be made small." A dam inside me that has been holding for months finally breaks, and I lean against the drafting table and let myself cry. My first day at Bramwell Architects is less of a welcome and more of an interrogation. The boardroom is a cavern of dark mahogany and gleaming glass, a space designed to intimidate. The board members are arranged around the table like a tribunal. The man leading them is Malcolm Price, the board chair. He's impeccably dressed with the predatory stillness of a crocodile waiting by the water's edge. His smile is a thin, bloodless line that doesn't come close to reaching his cold, calculating eyes. He opens the meeting by calling my inheritance an unusual situation and repeatedly refers to me as the interim leadership. He doesn't have to say it out loud. His tone makes it perfectly clear that he sees me as a temporary problem, a figurehead who will sign what she's told and then conveniently disappear in a year. The other board members, all older men in identical gray suits, follow his lead. Their questions are polite on the surface but laced with sharp barbs of doubt. They ask about my management experience. I tell them the truth, I don't have any. I feel my shoulders hunch, the familiar posture of the girl in the hatchback, small and exposed. But then I remember Edwin's note, the words burned into my mind. I refuse to be made small. I straighten my back, meet Malcolm's gaze, and tell them I'm here to learn the business and honor my uncle's legacy, not to liquidate it. The air in the room gets 10 degrees colder. After the meeting from hell, as the other board members file out, avoiding my eyes, one man stays behind. He's older, with a gentle demeanor and a kind face that seems out of place here. "I'm Tom Bennett," he says, extending a hand. "I was your uncle's partner for 30 years. He doesn't look at me with pity or suspicion like the others. He looks at me with a genuine, open curiosity. "Edwin always said you had the gift," Tom says, his voice soft. "He was so proud of your schoolwork. He used to show me your drawings. For the first time since I stepped into this building, I feel a flicker of warmth." Tom offers to walk me through the firm's active projects, to be a resource, a guide. "Malcolm runs the board," Tom says quietly, his voice dropping as he glances toward the empty doorway. "But Edwin ran the work, the soul of the place. That's what matters." He hands me a thick, heavy binder. "This is our most important pitch right now," he explains. "A new headquarters for a big tech company in Seattle. The meeting is in 3 weeks. Malcolm is leading the presentation." He gives me a look that says everything I need to know. "This is the first test. This is the arena, and Malcolm doesn't want you to pass." I spend the next 2 weeks living and breathing Bramwell Architects. I arrive at the office before the cleaners in the morning and leave long after the last designer has gone home. I bury myself in the work, trying to absorb a decade of industry knowledge in a matter of days. I study every project file, every financial report, every single blueprint I can get my hands on. I'm so far behind, and I know it, the feeling of being an imposter, a constant weight on my shoulders. Tom Bennett, my new mentor, is my guide through this labyrinth. He patiently explains the business side of things, how bids are structured, the fine print in contracts, the delicate art of managing clients. He's the only person in a position of power who treats my endless questions with genuine respect. Malcolm Price, the board chair, watches me from a distance. He's always excruciatingly polite, but it's a sharp, brittle politeness, like a thin sheet of ice over a deep, cold lake. He includes me in the meetings for the Seattle tech pitch, but only as a silent spectator. He presents the design concept to the team, a sleek but utterly soulless glass box. It feels like a project designed by a committee, technically brilliant but with no heart, no spark. It doesn't feel like a Bramwell building. In one team meeting, I work up the courage to offer a suggestion about incorporating more natural light and green spaces to improve employee well-being. Malcolm dismisses it instantly without even looking at me. "The client wants a monument to efficiency, Miss Morgan," he says coolly, his voice cutting through the room. "Not a greenhouse." The junior architects gathered around the table visibly shrink, their eyes darting down to their notebooks. The office culture is thick with a fear I can almost taste. It's quiet, tense, and everyone seems to walk on eggshells around Malcolm. I try to break through it, to connect with the staff. I'll stop by a designer's desk or find people in the break room, but the conversations are always clipped. I overhear snippets, whispers, "The new boss," someone will mutter, then fall silent the moment I walk in. They're hesitant, guarded, clearly terrified of being seen as aligning with me, the outsider. One afternoon, a young designer, Isabel Ruiz, a woman with bright, intelligent eyes, hesitantly shows me her work on a small community project. It's innovative and full of life, a beautiful, thoughtful design. She's clearly brilliant. I tell her so, praising her clever use of space, and she looks genuinely shocked, as if she's never been complimented before. "Mr. Price said it wasn't practical," she says quietly, looking down at her screen. That's when I realize Malcolm isn't just a corporate shark, he's a creativity killer. He's been systematically molding the firm in his own joyless image, safe, profitable, and completely uninspired. That night, I go back to the brownstone and start making my own notes on the Seattle pitch, sketching out ideas in the beautiful, silent studio. My ideas are different, a building that breathes, that serves the people inside it, that gives back to its environment. As I work late into the night, Ruth Parker, my great uncle's housekeeper, brings me a cup of tea. "Edwin used to do that," she says softly, a faint smile on her lips. "He said the best ideas came when the rest of the city was asleep." It's the day of the big Seattle pitch. The clients, a powerhouse tech CEO and her team, are flying in for this single high-stakes meeting. The project is worth 8 figures, landing it could secure the firm's finances for the next 5 years. Malcolm is running the presentation. My role, as he so kindly put it, is to sit there, smile, and look like the new, stable owner. I'd spent most of the previous night in my office reviewing the final presentation slides on my company laptop. It was Malcolm's sterile vision from start to finish. But at the very end of the deck, I had added a few slides of my own subtle, data-backed suggestions about sustainable design and employee-centric spaces. It was a small, quiet act of defiance. I walk into the office that morning feeling a familiar knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. The entire board is there, milling around the conference room. The tension is palpable. Malcolm gives me a tight, confident smile that doesn't reach his eyes. "Ready for the show, Miss Morgan?" he asks, his voice dripping with condescension. I nod and head to my office to grab my laptop. I want to sync my notes to my tablet before the meeting begins. My office is exactly as I left it, the pen beside the notepad, the file folders neatly stacked. But the laptop is gone. A cold wave of panic washes over me. I check everywhere, my heart starting to beat a little too fast. I check my drawers, the credenza along the wall, even under the desk. It's not there, it's just gone. I call in the head of IT, a nervous man named David who looks like he'd rather be anywhere else. He immediately starts a remote search, his fingers flying across his tablet, trying to locate the device on the company network. Just then, Malcolm appears at my door, feigning a look of deep concern. "Everything all right?" "The clients will be here in 20 minutes. It's a performance, I realize, a show for the other partners who are now watching from the hallway." David looks up from his tablet, his face pale. "I can't find the laptop on the network." "It's offline," he reports, his voice barely a whisper. "But there's something else. The master file for the Seattle presentation on the server, it's corrupted." My blood runs cold, the file is unreadable. All the polished renderings, the financial models, the carefully crafted talking points, everything, gone. Malcolm puts on a masterful display of shock. "That's impossible," he exclaims, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We have no presentation." He immediately suggests postponing, framing it as a catastrophic technical failure beyond anyone's control. "We'll have to apologize profusely to the client and reschedule," he says, shaking his head gravely. It's a major embarrassment for the firm. But as I look at his face, past the mask of fake dismay, I see it, just for a fraction of a second, a flicker of pure, unadulterated triumph in his eyes. He did this. This was his plan all along. He needed me to look incompetent, unlucky, a walking disaster from the very beginning. The clients are in the lobby. The CEO is famously impatient. Postponing isn't an option, it's surrender. It's exactly what he wants. "We're not postponing," I announce, my voice cutting through the panicked murmurs in the room. Everyone goes silent. Malcolm turns to me, his face a mask of disbelief. "And what precisely do you propose we present?" he sneers, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Interpretive dance?" My eyes land on the large, gleaming whiteboard at the front of the conference room. I look at the neat row of dry erase markers in the tray below it. An idea, wild and terrifying, takes root. "Get the clients," I say to Tom, who has been watching me with a worried expression. "The meeting is starting." Tom looks from me to the whiteboard and back again. A glimmer of something, hope, maybe even excitement, appears in his eyes. He trusts me, and right now that's enough. I walk to the front of the room, my legs feeling strangely steady. My hand is shaking slightly as I pick up a black marker, the plastic cool against my skin. My mind is racing, pulling up every detail I'd obsessively studied, every late-night sketch I'd made in my studio. I'm not presenting Malcolm's soulless glass box. I'm presenting a Bramwell building, my building. This isn't about his plan anymore, it's about mine. The tech CEO and her team walk in, their faces a mixture of expectation and impatience. I introduce myself, my voice calm and even. "We've had a significant technical glitch this morning," I say, meeting her gaze directly. "So instead of subjecting you to a boring slideshow, I'm going to tell you the story of your new building." Before anyone can object, I turn to the whiteboard and start to draw. My hand is steady now, the fear is gone, burned away by a surge of pure, unadulterated focus. I don't just sketch a building, I sketch an experience. With sweeping lines, I draw how the morning light will flood the central atrium, creating a space that feels alive. I sketch the rain garden courtyards that will not only be beautiful, but will also capture storm runoff and create quiet, green spaces for employees to think and recharge. I draw a sprawling green roof buzzing with pollinators, a living ecosystem visible from the executive offices. I talk about the science behind it, how studies show that a connection to nature increases productivity and reduces stress. I talk about smart windows that tint automatically with the sun, cutting energy costs by a projected 30%. I'm not just pitching a structure, I'm selling a better way to work, a philosophy. All the while, Malcolm is staring, his face a mask of slack-jawed disbelief. The clients, however, are leaning forward in their chairs, completely captivated. When I'm finished, the board is covered in a vision, a story told in black ink. The CEO stands up, she walks to the whiteboard, studying my drawing, then turns to look at me. "That," she says, a slow smile spreading across her face, "is the building we want. Send us the contract." Just like that, we've won. The office is buzzing with an energy I've never felt before. We've just landed the biggest project in a decade, and I did it with nothing but a dry erase marker and an idea. The board is stunned into a rare silence. Malcolm looks like he swallowed poison. As the clients are being escorted out, glowing with excitement, I pull David, the IT guy, aside. "I want a full forensic analysis of everything," I tell him quietly but firmly. "Server logs, remote access records, and all security footage from last night. Find out exactly who accessed that file, and find my laptop." David, who looked terrified an hour ago, now looks emboldened by the victory. He nods, his eyes determined. "On it," he says, and gets to work immediately. 2 hours later, he's at my office door. He looks nervous but triumphant. "The presentation file was accessed and then deleted from a remote login at 2:17 a.m., he says, holding up his tablet to show me the logs. "The login originated from an IP address I was able to trace." My heart thuds in my chest. "Where did it come from?" I ask. "The executive virtual private network," he says. "Specifically, the machine assigned to Malcolm Price." He swipes to another screen. "And we found your laptop. It was stashed in a recycling bin on the 3rd floor. The hard drive was completely wiped. But the security footage from that hallway shows Mr. Price's executive assistant dumping a bag in that same bin an hour ago." I call an emergency board meeting. Only Tom and I know the real reason. Malcolm walks in looking smug, probably assuming I'm about to be reprimanded for my impromptu presentation. I let him sit down, then I calmly lay out the evidence. I project the time-stamped server logs onto the main screen for everyone to see. I show them the IP address trace. I show them the high-resolution stills from the security footage of his assistant near the recycling bin. I don't make accusations, I don't raise my voice, I just present the facts. The facts are a guillotine. Malcolm tries to deny it, of course. He sputters about a security breach, a sophisticated hacker trying to frame him. But his voice lacks conviction and his eyes are darting around the room, looking for an ally he can no longer find. The other board members who just hours ago were his loyal followers are not buying it. Tom speaks up first, his voice filled with a quiet rage. "This was a deliberate act of sabotage against the firm, Malcolm, against Edwin's legacy." Seeing the tide turn so decisively, the other members quickly join in. Their survival instincts have kicked in. They need to distance themselves from a sinking ship. I offer Malcolm a choice: resign immediately and the board will agree to buy out his 28% stake in the company, or I turn every piece of this evidence over to the district attorney for corporate espionage. He stares at me, his face pale, his eyes filled with a pure, undiluted hatred that sends a chill down my spine. He signs the resignation letter without another word. He's gone by the end of the day. The first threat has been neutralized. But as I watch him leave, I know this isn't over. Someone like Malcolm doesn't work alone. That night, I'm in the fifth-floor studio looking out at the glittering tapestry of the city lights. The victory feels strangely hollow. I won the battle, yes, but the source of the rot feels deeper, more personal than just Malcolm. Why would he risk his entire career, his reputation, his massive stake in the company just to make me look bad? It doesn't add up. There has to be more to it. I hear a soft knock on the open door. It's Ruth, holding a tray with a steaming cup of chamomile tea. She sets it down on the drafting table beside me. She's been quiet all day, watching everything unfold with her knowing, steady eyes. "Edwin used to say you don't just cut the top off the weed," she says, her voice gentle but firm. "You have to pull out the root." She reaches into the pocket of her apron and pulls out a plain white envelope. It has no markings, no return address. "A bicycle courier delivered this an hour ago," she explains. "It was addressed simply to the woman of the house." "I believe that's you now." Her expression is serious. She seems to understand that this is important. She's more than a housekeeper, she's the keeper of this house's secrets and now its guardian. I take the envelope from her. It feels heavier than it should, like it contains more than just paper. It feels like it contains the truth. My hands tremble slightly as I open the envelope. Inside, there are 4 printed pages. No note, no explanation, just screenshots. The first set shows 4 bank transfer confirmations. Each one is for exactly $12,500. The transfers are from a personal investment account belonging to Derek Shaw, my ex-husband. The name hits me like a physical blow. The money is sent to a shell company, a numbered limited liability company with a generic, untraceable name I've never heard of. The next set of screenshots shows 4 corresponding transfers from that same shell company. The destination account is a private investment fund, and the fund manager is listed as Malcolm Price. The dates on the transfers line up perfectly: 1 payment a week every Friday for the last month. A total of $50,000. It's not subtle, it's a pay-to-sabotage scheme. It was Derek. It was always Derek. He wasn't content with leaving me homeless and broken. He had to go a step further. He wanted to destroy any chance I had of getting back on my feet. He was trying to make me fail the 1-year clause in the will. He was trying to make sure Edwin's entire fortune, my one impossible lifeline, vanished into thin air before I could truly claim it. The betrayal is so deep, so vicious and personal, it steals the air from my lungs. This was never just about the firm. It was about him, making sure I stayed on the ground after he had knocked me down. My plan needs bait. Something that Derek, a man who thrives on inside information and the illusion of power it gives him, would find utterly irresistible. He always believed knowledge was a shortcut, a way to game the system. I meet with David, our head of IT, in the privacy of my studio. He's become a quiet, fiercely loyal ally. Together, we create 2 perfect decoy design files. We bury them deep in the firm's server, but we make them accessible with Malcolm's old login credentials, which David secretly reactivates and sets up to monitor. File 1 is titled Project Nightingale Confidential Bid. It contains a set of fake, revolutionary-looking designs for a new city library, a high-profile project with massive public interest. We make the designs look brilliant but expensive, And then we create a fake bid sheet with artificially low numbers, making it look like the firm is in deep financial trouble and desperately lowballing to win the contract. File 2 is Project Titan Acquisition Analysis. It's a fabricated internal memo detailing a supposed plan for Bramwell Architects to aggressively acquire a smaller rival firm. I fill it with risky, arrogant language that would make any competitor or their investors extremely nervous. We also create a third piece of bait, something simpler and more emotional, a fake meeting memo in a simple text document. It outlines a non-existent emergency board meeting to discuss a leadership crisis and a potential fire sale of the company. Each file is embedded with a hidden digital tracker. The moment a file is opened, it will ping us with the time, the IP address, and the geographic location of the user. More importantly, if it's forwarded as an email attachment, the tracker will record the recipient's email address. The trap is digital, silent, and I hope absolutely deadly. I needed to get the bait into the water without anyone smelling it was my hand on the hook. That meant a little theater, some careful lies, and a greedy person with a loose jaw. I spent an afternoon scrolling through old LinkedIn profiles and Instagram feeds until I found Malcolm's recently fired executive assistant. She'd been posting passive-aggressive updates about being treated unfairly, pictures of coffee with captions like "interviews today, hoping for better." Her feed said she was strapped for cash. Perfect. I set up a throwaway email that looked like a legitimate headhunter, nothing fancy, just the right jargon to feel official. I wrote her slowly like someone offering sympathy and kept my sentences short and human. I told her I was sorry about what happened to her, that firms sometimes treated people badly, and that if she had any materials or access she thought might help prove the truth, she should consider selling them. I offered $10,000 as a consulting fee, framed as an urgent short-term job. It was more than she made in a month and less than what she might expect from the type of men who sell secrets for sport. She replied within an hour. Her words were a mix of anger and hope. She wanted the money, and for once she sounded unguarded. I played my part, sending a follow-up that promised discretion and a wire transfer once she delivered useful documents. Then I asked casually if there were any old login credentials or protocol docs she might have kept. She sent back, almost as an afterthought, a compressed folder. Inside were benign administrative documents, org charts, and a text file labeled Old Admin Passwords TXT. In it, among other things, was Malcolm's old executive username and a password that had probably been reset in the last handful of months but might still open something if reactivated. She'd clearly thought she was selling dirt. She hadn't known she was handing me a skeleton key. I wired the money immediately through an anonymous transfer service, then made sure she believed the exchange was over. David and I sat in my studio that night with the files open on 2 monitors, the city breathing out a low, steady hum through the windows. We didn't celebrate, we whispered. I felt an odd sickness and exhilaration together, like standing on a roof edge and finding the wind steady. The bait was set. All we needed now was patience and a little bit of luck. Waiting is a strange kind of work. It looks like nothing from the outside, but inside it builds a pressure that squeezes everything clear. David rigged a simple but effective watch on the server, a dashboard that lit up when the reactivated credentials were used, a log of IP addresses and timestamps, and a screen recorder that would capture anything the user did while logged in. He had it all feeding to a monitor in the small office Tom had offered me for late nights. The glowing screen became my nocturnal companion. I kept my days full of noise to hide the quiet twitch of the clock. Meetings, site visits, calls with vendors, I acted like a CEO under siege, busy, unflappable, endlessly practical. But every hour I stole was spent staring at the dashboard, watching the little green light blink a heartbeat of possibility. Tom noticed me jumping every time my phone buzzed and tried to keep me anchored. "An architect waits for the concrete to set," he said once, putting a hand to my shoulder. "You can't force it." Those first 48 hours felt like nothing. I paced the fifth-floor studio, made coffee that went cold, rewrote parts of the Seattle pitch in my head, and listened for any new sound in the building that didn't belong. David would tap my shoulder and shrug as if to say nothing yet. I slept in small fragments, waking to check the monitor as if I'd missed something crucial while breathing. On the second night, about 11:52, the monitor chirped. It was a soft alert, the kind you almost ignore, but my whole body locked into a single point. David's hands were already on the keyboard, fingers moving fast but calm. The dashboard showed a login. The old executive username had been used. The origin was a residential internet address from a well-heeled suburb back in Seattle, the kind of neighborhood Derek had always liked, with tidy hedges and two-car garages. My heart kicked. We started the screen recording without hesitation. The window on the monitor moved as the user clicked into folders, slowed at file names, hovered like someone tasting a menu. The login sequence was clumsy. Whoever it was wasn't a daily server user, they were working from a place of simple human greed. They opened the fake meeting memo first, then lingered over Project Nightingale. The tracker pinged every time a file was opened and then when it was downloaded. The user downloaded both decoy files, spent a few minutes scanning each, then did the thing I'd hoped they'd do. They attached the library bid to an outgoing email. The address they typed in made my throat go dry. It was Derek's work email. The sender field looked like it was from Malcolm's personal account, the kind of anonymous mailbox he'd used to keep his hands clean. The recording captured the exact sequence: open, attach, type, send. 9 minutes of digital footprints that connected Derek to Malcolm with no gaps. David and I stared at the frozen frames where the cursor hovered over Derek's address and felt something like holy quiet. We had the chain. The login, the download, the forward, the trap had closed. Adrenaline came first, sharp and fierce. Then the cold wash of vindication. I thought of the screenshots Ruth had given me, the bank transfers that showed Derek sending money into a shell and then it filtering toward Malcolm. The server log, the recording, the transfer confirmations, they fit together like bones in a skeleton. There was no longer any question about motive or method. It was a direct, unpaid-for, reckless attempt to wreck me before my year was up. The next morning, I walked into the office with a feeling I hadn't had since childhood. I was quietly dangerous. I had proof, and I intended to use it cleanly. I wasn't expecting company. So when my assistant poked her head in and said there was a man in the lobby asking for me, I thought it was another client or a reporter. Instead, a man with the kind of smile that was polished, practiced, and predatory was waiting in my office like he had every right to be there. He wore a navy suit that fit like it was made for him, a watch that probably cost more than my car, and a face practiced at being sincere. "Miss Morgan," he said, extending a hand that felt like a transaction. "Colin Wu." Wu conglomerate. His voice had a smoothness that made me line in and then recoil. He exhaled a look around the room like he was evaluating the picture he might later use to sell this meeting as evidence he was magnanimous. He sat down before I invited him and began speaking as if he were doing me a favor. "I heard about the trouble with your board," he said, as if he were speaking to a neighbor whose fence needed repair. "It must be terribly distracting." I admired Edwin's work for years, such integrity in an industry that forgets the word. His eyes flicked to a model on a shelf, then back to me. "We'd like to help preserve his legacy." He didn't pretend to be subtle. He put a slim folder on the table and pushed it across. Inside were numbers and glossy projections and phrases about synergy and scale. He offered $300 million for the firm, full buyout, immediate. He spoke as if he were offering a rescue. "It frees you to do anything you want," he said, his voice the kind of sugar that masks a knife. "We have the resources to make Bramwell a global brand, Miss Morgan." There were 1,000 ways to respond. I could have taken the safety he dangled like a cheap prize. I could have pictured myself off somewhere with enough money to forget Derek ever existed. Instead, I felt Edwin's note, heavy and impossible, in my pocket. I looked at Colin and saw a man who ate firms like vitamins, steady and hungry. "I'll consider your offer," I said, soft enough to be polite and sharp enough to be a refusal. He smiled, and there was a flicker, almost amusement, in his eyes, as if my hesitation confirmed his belief. A young woman, sentimental, unable to make the hard choice for the good of everyone on paper. "Think quickly," he said. "Opportunities like this don't wait. Bramwell needs strong leadership, not a feel-good project. If you can't provide that, we can bring someone in who can." He left the folder and a business card, and as he stood, he added conversationally, "I hear from some sources that you've had internal trouble. A leak here, a scandal there, it's messy, we can clean it up." He knew about Malcolm. He knew, I realized, that the fake memo had already made the rounds somewhere loud enough for people like him to notice. He shook my hand firmly, then left with the kind of politeness that cleared the room of its conscience. When the door clicked shut behind him, the room felt smaller. The offer was obscene and flattering and dangerous all at once. 300 million could secure every worry I had ever had, but it would also fade the Bramwell name into a brand that looked like any other. It was exactly the kind of compromise Edwin warned against. The heckle in my chest wasn't about money anymore. It was about whether I would let someone else decide what Bramwell would mean. The choice felt like the axis of my whole life. The bored reaction to Colin Wu's offer peeled back the last of the thin paint that had been pretending to hold this place together. I called a meeting and told them what had happened with the login and the forwarded files. I told them about the bank transfers Ruth had handed me. I expected some kind of outrage, or at least a quiet consensus that we needed to stand firm. What I got instead was hungry eyes and quick math. "You have to consider the practicalities, Quinn," one partner said, his voice oily with relief. 300 million fixes a lot of problems, it secures livelihoods, it gives us stability." "Stability for whom?" I asked. My voice ended up louder than I intended. They shifted. "For the shareholders, for the staff, this is a competitive market." They used words like market and shareholders like bandages for their fear. Tom was silent at first, just watching the faces around the table. Then he spoke, slow and steady. "We're not selling the soul of this firm. Edwin spent his life building something that mattered. We owe that to more than a balance sheet." That helped some. A few heads nodded, but most leaned forward, imagining the checks and the retirement plans. One man I barely knew cleared his throat and said, "Quinn, with respect, you're young. You just started, you had a lucky win. This is what leaders do, take the secure option." They thought I'd gotten lucky. They thought my marker trick had been a fluke. The fear in the room was palpable. They were terrified of losing clients, of being blamed for any misstep, of the idea that a woman in her 30s could lead with something other than bland caution. So their instinct was to cut the risk. "We can vote on it," another partner suggested. "A formal review, let's put the offer on the table and get a third-party valuation. If the price is right, we accept. If it's not, we decline." It sounded reasonable because it was a sucker's sentence. A review meant drawn-out meetings, leaked concerns, nervous clients, slowed projects, exactly the kind of chaos that would make me look ineffective. I could survive a bad quarter. I couldn't survive the kind of slow erosion of confidence that even a whisper could start. They weren't offering a discussion, they were offering a trap. Tom's face crumpled with frustration. "You'd force a vote?" he asked. "Do you really want to hand this to a man who tears the firm apart?" "They're asking for fiduciary responsibility," the same partner said with a little sniff, as if that phrase absolved them. "We have to consider the best path for everyone." It dawned on me that their best path for everyone was usually the easiest path for them. They were scared, and fear is a powerful persuader. I felt the old loneliness settle back on my shoulders, the one that used to curl up with me in the hatchback. I realized then that winning the Seattle contract hadn't won me allies. It had only made some people more anxious about change. I had the evidence to take Derek down. I had reason and proof. But I was standing at the center of a room full of people who might trade our name for comfort without a second thought. After that meeting, a formal ultimatum arrived in a thin, polite email. They framed it carefully: a request for an independent review of Colin Wu's offer to be completed by the end of the week. If I refused, they would move for a vote of no confidence at the next board meeting. They didn't say it in so many words, but the message was clear. They couldn't fire me outright because of the terms of the will, but they could make my life unbearable. They could feed the press a steady drip of doubt. They could call our biggest clients and gently suggest that leadership change was imminent. They could make the one-year clause look like a ticking time bomb. I sat in the studio with Ruth's cup of tea gone cold beside me and read the message 3 times. Tom came by, closed the door gently, and sat across from me. He didn't say much. He just put his hands on my binder and held them there like a bridge. "They're frightened," he said finally. "They're not evil, they're frightened men who have been handed a choice, but a vote of no confidence would do exactly what they want. It would create the perception of instability." Could they manage it? I asked, because I needed the answer the way someone needs an anchor in rough water. Could they spook clients, close accounts? Yes, he said, and worse. They could make this firm look like a thing that needs saving. People like Colin will do the rest. For a long time, I just stared at the mug ring on the drafting table, at the ghost of steam. My thoughts went back to small things, the kind that make a life. I thought about the hatchback, the scratch on the passenger door where I'd backed into a mailbox in a rainstorm. I thought about the midnight dinners in empty kitchens, the nights when I told myself that it would get better. The temptation of Colin Wu's $300 million wasn't about greed. It was about the chance to stop being scared forever. I could accept the offer and make every problem disappear. That night I walked without purpose. The city felt both too loud and too necessary, like a chorus that wouldn't let me tune out. I found myself retracing the path to a little park where I used to sit after late study sessions in college, where the world felt like something I could shape. I sat on a cold bench and wrapped my coat tighter. My phone buzzed with messages I ignored. The skyline looked indifferent. What am I even fighting for? I asked myself. A building, a name, a letter pinned to a corkboard in a room I hadn't seen in years. It all seemed fragile against the smart men who could afford better lawyers and better spreadsheets. Derek's voice, the one that had told me for 10 years that I was a dreamer and nothing more, slipped into the hollow between my ribs. "You're not a builder," he had said in cheap tissue tones once, and those words had lodged there like a splinter. For a long time, I let the doubt have me. I pictured a quiet life in a small coastal town, a place where no one measured me by a balance sheet. I imagined being free of the constant pressure, free of the need to guess who might stab me in the back next. The thought was dizzying and merciful. It was the kind of fantasy that tastes like sugar and then leaves you empty. When I finally went back to the brownstone, Ruth found me in the library where the wall of books felt like the safest thing in the world. She didn't ask about the board or the offer. She simply reached into her apron and pulled out a small, locked wooden box, the wood worn smooth from years of hands. The key was tied to a ribbon, frayed and soft. "Edwin told me to give you this if you ever thought about selling," she said, as if she were handing me a moral compass. Her voice carried a weight that made my throat tight. I sat down hard on the nearest chair, the wood creaking under me. The letter inside was on paper that had been folded and refolded, edges softened by time. Edwin started like he always had, direct and a little impatient. He wrote about regret, about the years he had watched architecture bend to the language of profit. "They will make you trade legacy for currency," he wrote. "They will tell you it is practical. Building is not medicine for fear. Building is truth. It asks you to be honest about who you are." He told a story about a small public library he'd fought to save when real estate developers wanted to turn it into a high-end condo. He spoke of the people who used the library, the children who read under the oak table, the old man who came for warmth in winter. "Architecture matters because people matter," he wrote. "If you sell to a buyer who doesn't believe that, you've built for the wrong god." At the bottom of the page, in a hand that I knew as well as my own, he added something that made the air in the room change. "There is a second trust," he wrote. A failsafe, it only becomes yours if you refuse a full buyout offer from a competitor. It was my wager that you had the stubbornness of a builder. Don't sell, Quinn, build. The letter wasn't just permission, it was a dare. It was the sound of someone who believed in me even when I didn't. The fear that had felt like an iron bar across my chest shifted into something else: responsibility. I could feel the hatchback shrinking into the past like a small, useful scar. The life that had been stolen from me by a charmer in a suit seemed less permanent than the thing that had been handed to me by a man who had taught me to think in angles and light. The next morning, I didn't go to the office. I walked to a print shop 2 blocks from the brownstone, the kind with a humming copier and a woman at the counter who knew that people sometimes needed things printed in a hurry. I felt both absurd and surgically precise as I sat at the counter and told her it needed to be fast and clean. She nodded, and we both understood the kind of rush that makes your palms slick. I assembled a packet with the care of someone laying stones. Page 1 was the 4 screenshots of Derek's payments, clear images of numbers and dates and account names. Page 2 held the screenshots showing the shell company forwarding funds to an account associated with Malcolm. Page 3 was a printout of the server log simplified into a timeline anyone could follow. This login at this time, this file opened, this file downloaded. I didn't use complicated words. I wrote login from executive account and file deleted in plain sentences. Page 4 was a timeline that cross-referenced that login with an internet address that matched Derek's home connection. I printed it as a simple list with dates and times and a short note. We matched these. Page 5 was the transcript of the screen recording. I described what the cursor did, what file was opened, and the moment the file was attached to an outgoing message. I wrote it as a story line by line so anyone who read it would see the sequence like a little film. Page 6 was a screenshot of the email header showing the file sent from Malcolm's private account to Derek's official work address. I circled the relevant pieces with a red pen not because it was flashy but because it felt honest to point at the obvious. The packet felt heavier than the paper it was printed on. It was weight and order and truth stacked between cardboard. I slid it into a crisp envelope and wrote the recipients' names in block letters, the chief executive at Ellis & White and the head of their ethics committee. I paid extra for a bonded courier and asked for delivery confirmation. The woman at the counter handed me a receipt with a tracking number and said, "You're sure about this?" Her eyes were kind. I nodded. Outside, the city smelled like rain on hot pavement and exhaust. For the first time in a long while, the next move felt like mine. I had the packet, the proof, and a plan that didn't require me to beg the board for courage. The rest would be structural work, careful, relentless, and honest. I dialed Susan Vance with my hands still smelling faintly of printer ink. The packet had been couriered, delivered to the chief executive and the head of the ethics committee at Derek's firm 30 minutes earlier. I had put everything in plain language so there wouldn't be wiggle room for clever spin: dates, amounts, times, and a step-by-step transcript of the screen recording that showed exactly what had happened. It felt oddly intimate, handing another person the story of someone who'd tried to ruin me. When Susan answered, her voice was calm and direct. I introduced myself and then I let my voice be short and steady. "I have credible information that a senior executive at Ellis & White has been involved in a corporate sabotage scheme targeting my firm," I said. I didn't go into a long explanation. I didn't need to. I gave her the names she needed to know: Derek Shaw and Malcolm Price. I told her that a packet of evidence had been delivered to Derek's chief executive and their head of ethics, and that it contained bank transfers, server logs, and a screen recording that showed a file forwarded from a personal account to Derek's official email. I told her that I had also contacted the other firm's ethics office directly. She asked a few pointed questions: who else knew, whether the firm had been asked for comment, whether there were witnesses. I answered each one without drama. "We have proof," I said. "We are giving you time to call them for comment. They can confirm or deny. The packet you might want to see is being delivered now." There was a pause on her line. The kind of pause reporters use to measure whether something is true. Then she said, "All right, send me the packet digitally as well. I'll need to confirm the documents and speak to both parties." I told her I would send a secure copy immediately and gave her my own number for follow-up. Before we hung up, she asked quietly, "Are you okay, Miss Morgan?" It was less a human question than a professional check, but the edge of concern in her voice made my throat tighten. "I will be," I said. It was likely the truest thing I'd said all day. After the call, I sat in my office with the city spread out below the windows and felt the strange, electric hush of someone who had pulled the lever on a complicated machine. I didn't know how fast the other pieces would fall into place, only that I had started things moving in a direction that couldn't be easily stopped. I watched the phone buzz with a string of missed calls I didn't answer yet. Tom, Ruth, the courier, and I felt oddly steady. The morning sunlight felt different somehow, more like approval than glare. When I walked into the boardroom later that afternoon for the emergency meeting, the room already had the tense smell of a place that had decided something it couldn't take back. Papers were scattered like falling leaves. Partners sat in their usual chairs, the ones that made them look more important. Faces I had thought were friendly a week before looked thin and greedy. Colin Wu's offer was on everyone's mind like smoke. They jumped in as if they had been rehearsing. "We need to evaluate Wu's proposal," one partner said, the same one who had called the buyout a practical solution. "For the good of the company." The words sounded like a prayer and also a warning. I let them talk for a few minutes. I let them set out the numbers, lay out the arguments about risk and management because they needed the small victory of speech. Then I held up my hand and the room quieted because no one could talk over a hand when it came from the person who had the will and the key. "There is no discussion about a sale," I said, and my voice cut through like a blade. It surprised even me how steady I sounded. "Today we're talking about the future of this firm, my future." I could see confusion ripple through the room. This woman they thought would be pliant was not pliant. I told them that I had rejected Colin Wu's offer. I didn't tell them about the second trust Edwin had mentioned, yet. I wanted to see who would stand still and who would run when the floor beneath them hardened. I told them about Edwin's charge to me to protect the soul of Bramwell Architects. I spoke about buildings as promises to people, not as quick wins to be traded. I could feel Tom's eyes on me like the best kind of scaffold, support without smothering. "This company is not for sale," I said again, and I watched the color leave half the room. "Not now, not ever. We are going to build." There were groans, protests, and a few sharp, whispered objections. "You're risking the firm's stability," someone said. "You've only been in this role a short time. You had a lucky win." "It wasn't luck," I said. "It was work. It was understanding what Bramwell stands for." My hand moved to the binder where Tom had kept the Seattle files. "And this is our first step, the Bramwell Fellowship." I laid out the plan in simple sentences. 10 fellows a year, each with a $40,000 stipend and a housing voucher. Young people who couldn't afford to keep working or studying could come into our studio and learn. I looked around the table as I spoke, and I put a new weight in the room with each point. "And the lead on our first major fellowship project will be Isabel Ruiz," I said, and when Isabel's name left my mouth, a few heads at the table, ones who had dismissed her just days ago, shifted uncomfortably. "She'll lead the design and delivery of a 24-bed women's shelter in Seattle. It will be full of dignity and light. It will be Bramwell." Some partners stared at me as if I had drawn a map where none had existed. I told them about the funding, an initial $250,000 donation to get it started. "And yes," I added, "the donation will be made in the name of Ellis and White." My voice didn't waver. "I'd already sent the packet to their ethics committee. They can choose to make their own decisions publicly," I said, "but we are moving forward." The room went quiet in a good way that felt like the settling of a new foundation. Some of them looked furious. Some looked embarrassed. A few older partners who had once worked with Edwin had tears in their eyes. I had stopped playing their game. I had given them a future that required effort, and that made them small and proud at the same time. My phone buzzed in my pocket just as I finished. I glanced down. A news alert from Susan Vance's outlet blinked across the screen. Headline: Ellis and White executive fired amid corporate sabotage scandal. Derek Shaw's name was already in the subhead. I felt a strange, clean relief, as if the pollutant in the air had been cleared. Within an hour, the fallout had a shape. There were official statements, short, clipped, and full of the kind of language that tries to sound dignified while apologizing. Derek's firm issued a statement about a serious breach of ethical conduct. Their chief executive said they had acted swiftly when presented with credible evidence. Derek's profile went dark. His photo was removed from the firm's website. Social media feeds that had once been full of his smiling face went silent. The law firm that handled my divorce, the downtown firm with its polished reception and unctuous partners, put out a public apology for improper contact and announced a donation of $250,000 to a local legal aid organization. They called it community partnership. I called it a guilt payment and a good first step toward making amends for the role they had played in my fall. I still plan to direct a donation in their name to the shelter. Letting them announce a payment first felt like giving the public what it needed to feel that justice had been done. Malcolm Price was ruined in a way that was slow and certain. His name was linked to the scandal and to the frozen funds pending civil action. People I had once seen in the elevator with him looked at him like someone with an illness. The board forced the sale of his remaining stake to protect the firm from further risk. It was a quiet unraveling, but it was a complete one. Colin Wu withdrew his $300 million offer with a short email that said, "Well played." There was a smile in the small phrase that didn't reach the eyes. He and his people had seen strength where he expected weakness, and he didn't like surprises. He left room for future moves, but for now he stepped back. Derek disappeared from the city's social circles like someone stepping out of a play mid-scene. Friends I had heard about privately began to tell me his phone went unanswered, that he was being avoided. The image he'd carefully curated, the easy charm, the proven closability, crumbled under the weight of simple proof. He had once used my homelessness as a punchline in front of clients. Now he was the one no one wanted in the room. I never spoke to him again. I didn't need to. Silence felt larger than any word I could have said. It was a final, hard line. It let me keep something for myself that no verdict could take away. A week later, Lydia Grant called with a voice that had a small, private smile in it. "Congratulations, Miss Morgan," she said. "By formally rejecting the buyout offer from Wu Conglomerate, you have fulfilled the final condition of your great uncle's will." She told me the second trust was now active, $30 million, unrestricted. It wasn't for the company. It was for me. I let the number sit in the air for a moment, like something too bright to look at directly. $30 million for a person like me, someone who had slept in a car 3 months before, felt both unreal and sanctified. "This isn't just money," Lydia said quietly. "It's an opportunity. Edwin left it as a test and you passed. He wanted you to prove you'd value the work over the sale." I walked to the window of the 5th-floor studio and stared at the city the way one looks at a blueprint before starting to draw. The blood behind my ribs felt steady and warm. The trust was not validation I sought to impress the world. It was validation I needed to forgive myself. I had been raised to believe the world could pin me into a corner and that I would stay there. This was proof that a corner could be opened. I knew immediately what I would do with the money. I wouldn't build a monument to my name. I would build things that made people's lives better. Libraries in neighborhoods where kids didn't have a safe place to study. Parks with benches and lights and trees, not just manicured lawns for the wealthy. Grants to community groups who knew their neighborhoods better than any consultant ever could. The Bramwell Fellowship would get a real endowment so we could fund 10 fellows every year forever, not just until a budget cycle came around. I thought of Isabel in Seattle, her hands steady on a sketch tablet, the way she had looked when I had praised her work. I thought about the women who would stay in that shelter and wake up to morning light and a garden outside the window. That image made the money mean something more than security. It made it a tool. I called Tom first. He answered on the first ring, and his voice had a catch to it I couldn't place: pride, maybe, or agreed relief. Edwin would be so proud, he said, and I could hear tears in him. He told me he'd help steward the funds into projects that would last. Ruth came by that afternoon and put her hand on my shoulder like the old, steady thing she was. She did not say, "I told you so." She didn't need to. Her face said it for her. For the first time in a very long time, I allowed myself to imagine a future that wasn't stitched together from fear. The money would let Bramwell do what Edwin had always believed: build things that mattered. It was the end of one kind of survival and the beginning of something that felt like making. I kept thinking of the note pinned to my corkboard: build boldly, refuse to be made small. The phrase had followed me from the fifth-floor studio to every meeting, into every quiet, painful midnight when doubt tried to creep back. Now it felt like a promise I had finally learned to keep, not for anyone else, but for the person who had been left in a hatchback and who had learned how to stand again. The year that followed felt like building a slow, careful foundation. Bramwell Architects changed from the inside out. We moved from defensive meetings to design reviews where people argued about light and material and how a building makes someone feel, not how much profit it would scrape in the first quarter. The Bramwell Fellowship took off faster than any of us expected. 10 fellows a year, each with a $40,000 stipend and a housing voucher, showed up with notebooks full of ideas and stubborn hearts. The application pile was taller than the models on our shelves. We had kids from small towns, first-generation students, people who had worked construction, and people who had self-taught themselves design through community projects. It felt like opening a window in a room that had been closed for too long. Isabel Ruiz, who had been a junior designer when she first showed me her work, led the Seattle Shelter Project like she'd been doing it her whole life. She hired from the neighborhood. She ran community meetings where people actually put their fingerprints on the drawings. The shelter wasn't a bunker. It had big windows that filled the rooms with morning light, a courtyard where kids could run, and plants that softened the concrete edges. Isabel made small choices that mattered: sturdy boots in the entryway, hooks at reachable heights, a pantry that felt like dignity rather than charity. She called it a house that remembered you were a person. The board shifted too. The men who stayed learned to listen. The ones who couldn't change stepped down and made space for younger partners who believed in the work. Tom stayed, my steady, grumpy, brilliant Tom. He still sat at the edge of meetings, but now he smiled more. Ruth was there in the brownstone like she always had been, a quiet cheerleader with perfect tea. We funded libraries in neighborhoods that had been ignored, parks with real benches and lights, small community centers with kitchens where kids could learn to cook. The money felt less like a trophy and more like an engine we kept refilling with care. On the morning of the opening ceremony in Seattle, the air had that clear, new kind of cold that makes everything smell sharp. The shelter looked like a promise kept. It was brick and timber and glass, but mostly it was light. The windows were arranged so the rising sun cut across the common room in a ribbon of warmth. Inside, there were beds that weren't stacked like hospital cots but set apart with little curtains and plants on the windowsills. The courtyard had a rain garden that collected water and a place for neighbors to sit and talk. We stood with Isabel as the mayor gave a short speech about community and second chances. I felt a mix of fatigue and awe, like finishing an impossible climb and finding a field at the top. I scanned the crowd out of habit, looking for faces that mattered. Across the street, reflected in the shelter's glass, was the tall, shiny tower where Ellis and White had offices. In front of that tower, on the sidewalk like someone who had wandered out of the wrong act, stood Derek. He looked smaller than I remembered, shoulders hunched, hands deep in his coat pockets. For a second our eyes met. He leaned forward as if expecting an accusation or a scene. Instead I smiled, soft, honest, a little tired. He looked away and then turned and walked down the block, swallowed by the city. When the ribbon was cut, people cheered. Children ran through the doorway and discovered a place that was safe and warm. Isabel hugged me, mud on her shoes and tears in her eyes. The shelter did exactly what we'd hoped. It gave people rest and the space to stand up again. Standing there, among the laughter and the small cups of coffee we were handing out, I felt something settle in me. It wasn't revenge anymore, it was repair. It was making the kind of life people could live openly, without shame, in the light. Thank you for listening. If you've ever had to start over, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. Please subscribe for more stories like this one, and I'll see you in the next video.